G'day everyone, welcome to the third and final video for week 10 of our Legal Ethics and Trust Accounting course. As you already know, this week we're looking at the duties practitioners owe towards one another. We've already learned that the first duty is to understand that our opponent is not our enemy, and that as practitioners and colleagues we ought to be courteous towards one another. There is no doubt that every case is a contest, but that doesn't mean every case should descend into some sort of unseemly brawl. In the second video, we looked at the duty not to take unfair advantage of an opponent's error in a way that defeats the ability of the court to do justice. In this third video, we look at a specific type of error called an inadvertent disclosure. An inadvertent disclosure quite simply occurs when your opponent makes an error and reveals something to you that they should not have revealed. It might be, for instance, that they reveal some document provided to them by their client, but within their client's confidentiality. Or it might be that they inadvertently disclose to you some document related to an entirely different matter. The essence of the situation is that something has come into your hands and you know it shouldn't have. Let me describe some examples. I'll start with a very old school example. Back in the olden days, physical documents routinely passed from one firm to another, and those documents lived on physical files, which were stored in large cupboards called compactuses. To take a document off the file, you would physically remove it. Now, it would only require a moment's inattention to mistakenly remove the document you intended to copy, but also the top page of the next document in the pile. If nobody picked up the error, then your opponent might end up with that additional page, and goodness knows what might be on it. It's easy to think of more modern scenarios. In fact, these sorts of errors are way easier to make in the modern computerized environment. For instance, imagine if your associate or senior associate was sending an email to your opponents and you were copied into the email. You have some additional information to provide to your associate, information that's not yet known to the other side and that's been provided in confidence. Now imagine, instead of hitting reply, you've inadvertently hit reply all. Super embarrassing. Not just super embarrassing, you've also actually breached your duty of confidence to the client. It's so easy to do. Requires just a fraction of a second's inattention. Similarly, imagine for a moment that you're sending a document to the other party. It's a letter in response to a letter that they wrote to your firm. The letter has been kicked back and forth between you and your senior associate for a little while you tried to work out the best response. You eventually came up with a letter you're happy with and you sent it off with the track changes still enabled. Your opponent can now see the entire conversation. Ouch. One more example. During this course, I've already mentioned to you the discovery process, which occurs in civil matters when each side provides documents to the other. Now, a perfectly normal part of the discovery process is that each side claims privilege over the documents that ought not properly to be shown to the other side. These days, discovery is then mostly undertaken by using an online document transfer system like Dropbox or Google Drive, or there are specific legal equivalents such as wecan't. So basically, on your firm's file management system, you take all of the files to be disclosed to your opponents, you put them in a shared folder, and then you share that file with your opponents. Can you see how very easy it is to accidentally put the wrong document in that shared folder? It's the sort of thing that could happen to anyone. And from time to time, it happens to everyone. We're all human. The important thing in this situation is to remember that the system of justice has to prevail and client confidentiality has to prevail. And so we have to respect not only our own client's confidentiality, but our opponent's client's confidentiality. That's really what we're doing when we obey the requirement not to take advantage of an inadvertent disclosure by our opponent. We're protecting their client's confidentiality and protecting the integrity of the justice system. So, what does the rule say? Australian Solicitors Conduct Rule 31 covers the issue. It comes in 3 parts. Rule 31.1 says that if you obtain information that you know or reasonably suspect is confidential from the other side or from some other person, so the rule still counts if, say, the opponent's client inadvertently hits reply all. If you obtain that information, you have to get rid of it by deleting, destroying, whatever. And you have to let your opponent know first that they made the inadvertent disclosure and second, what you did about it. I'll pause for a moment to tell you all that the custom is that this email informing your opponent that they've made an error is always written with the very greatest of courtesy. Resist any temptation to have even the slightest dig at your opponent, because one day, I guarantee, one day it will be you relying on your opponent to follow this rule, and you sure won't want them taking a dig at you then. The second bit, Rule 31.2, says that if you're already reading the material and you're kind of puzzled and you eventually work out that you're reading something you're not supposed to, you have to stop reading at that point. And in that case, when you notify the other side of their error, you also have to notify them that you read part of the material prior to deletion. Now that's all the rule says, but again there's a custom, which is as much as humanly possible, you have to then conduct the matter as though you hadn't read the material. In other words, while you can't exactly scrub your brain clean, as an officer of the court you can do your very best to ensure that your client does not obtain an unfair advantage, so that the ability of the court to do justice is not compromised. The final bit, Rule 31.3, says that even if your client directly instructs you to read the inadvertently disclosed material, you must not follow that instruction. This is one of those situations where your duty to the court overrides your duty to follow the client's instructions. An example from the cases comes in a case called Expense Reduction and Analysts Group against Armstrong Strategic Management and Marketing. This matter started life as a fairly routine commercial contract dispute, but the discovery process was exhausting. Over 60,000 documents were ultimately required to be discovered. It's probably not a surprise that somewhere along the way errors were made. Some privileged documents were disclosed. The other side argued that by disclosing them, the disclosure had waived privilege and so the documents were fair game. The argument ended up in front of the High Court, which was unamused. Their Honours found that the disclosed document should be destroyed, and they expressed what I would describe as frustration that they had even been required to rule on this. Their Honours said that the duty to delete and ignore inadvertently disclosed material was an example of professional ethical obligations of legal practitioners supporting the objectives of the proper administration of justice. So the bottom line is that if you receive something you shouldn't, then your obligation is to not read it or to stop reading it, to notify the other side of the error, and to delete the materials from your system. My advice, pretend it was you that had made the inadvertent disclosure. Act as you would want your opponent, your colleague, to act in that situation if you were the one who'd made the error. Well, here we are at the end of week 10. We've talked this week about the duties that solicitors owe to one another. The duty to be courteous, the duty not to take unfair advantage of your opponent's error, and the duty not to take advantage of inadvertent disclosures. Next week, week 11, it's a big one. We're going to spend the week discussing ethical rules as they apply to advocacy. And so next week is the first week in this course, the only week in this course, where we're really going to have a bunch of stuff to do with the barrister's rules. There's 5 videos next week, so take a break now. You'll need your strength. See you next week.